Joining me right now with reaction, Barron's.com editor Jack Otter, Bullseye brief publisher and author Adam Johnson, and American Majority CEO Ned Ryun. Good to see you all.
Thanks, Trish.
I want to get to a clip from this interview because Maria asked him about who might be there on the Fed, and I want to run that sound for you. Have we got it? Let's do it.
Mr. President, who do you want to see running the Fed?
Well, as you know, I've been seeing a number of people, and most people are saying it's down to two, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Powell. I also met with Janet Yellen, who I like a lot. I really like her a lot. So I have three people that I'm looking at, and there are a couple of others. I'd say I will make my decision very shortly.
So this is interesting. John Taylor, we all know, and he comes from a school of thought that has been extremely critical of the Federal Reserve. He would do the opposite, perhaps, of what Janet Yellen has been doing. Jerome Powell is someone who would be more in line with what Janet Yellen is doing. But Jack Otter, I mean, you look at 23,304 on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. You look at 3.1% growth in GDP, record low unemployment, wages starting to tick up in some of the data we have seen. And I gotta wonder, if it ain't broke, why fix it?
Well, let's see. So the argument, the Taylor argument, there are lots, but for raising interest rates right now would be if growth is really 3.1%. I don't think that's the annual average. I think we're at about 2.5%. We had a lousy quarter, then a good quarter. I bet it'll settle around 2.5%. But the point is, if growth is good, unemployment is really low, the market's doing well, you don't have interest rates at historic lows. You raise them. Now, if you are Donald Trump, if you are in the market, you like cheap money, right? So there's a bit of a conflict there. And I think what's really interesting right now is we're talking about tax reform. That's stimulative, right? You know, you lower taxes, especially if you lower it on middle and lower income people because they're going to spend the money. That's stimulative. So what position does that put the Fed in? They probably have to hike faster, which, of course, could dampen down the stimulative effect of that tax cut. So that's an interesting dynamic
I don't
right now.
know is Donald Trump would love to see that dampened.
I don't think so. He's a low interest rates guy. You know,
Indeed.
Real estate, right?
Yeah. You know, spend. Adam Johnson, you know, you and I have discussed at length the challenges this economy faces and has faced. One of the problems in the last 8 years, we got no economic policy out of Washington. Nothing. And the Fed was the only game in town. Now we're starting to get economic policy in the way of tax cuts, which will be meaningful. But are you running a risk by working too quickly to raise rates? I mean, might John Taylor be of that camp because he's concerned about an asset bubble, which I don't think it's a bubble. I think we've got good fundamentals underneath it all, but hopefully this continues.
Yeah, there's not a bubble here, Trish, but what we're really talking about is trying to get back to normal. And John Taylor wants to get us back to normal. You know, if you look back at what the Fed did in 2008, they created a bid when nobody else would buy. Mission accomplished. A lot of people came in and bought, and now it's time for the Fed to step aside, let the private sector do what it does best, which is to actually put capital to work, deploy capital, build businesses, hire other Americans, and go about their business. And you can't do that when rates are artificially low, Trish, because it creates no urgency. You don't feel like you have to go out and borrow now and spend the money. So it's time to get back to normal.
All right. So you'd like to see John Taylor.
Oh,
that's what I'm
absolutely
interpreting
would.
from that.
Oh, 100%. Powell is very soft. Okay, he's going to go easy on the banks. I'm long banks, so I'm actually happy if Powell gets it. But I think John Taylor gets us to where we need to be much sooner, much faster. He's my man.
Ned Ryun, what are you hearing? What are your sources telling you? Who's really in the running?
Well, I'm of the opinion that Gary Cohn shouldn't even be mentioned anymore. In fact, I'm convinced Gary Cohn shouldn't even be at the White House. I think he should have resigned over his public break with Donald Trump over Charlottesville. The more I'm reading about it, the more I like John Taylor, but you know, we'll have to see what takes place. I do not want to see Gary Cohn, and I do not want to see Janet Yellen. You
don't want to see Yellen? I mean, even though you get Dow 23K?
I'm liking
First
John Taylor.
woman Fed chief. Kind of nice in the Trump administration.
You know what? We've had enough of Yellen. I like John Taylor. Let's see where that goes. Let's get a little bit of a change at the Federal Reserve. So
right.
let's go. Let's go with something new.
Let's make sure we cover both fiscal and monetary policy here. Let me ask you, Ned. We got a budget passed. That's a big deal. Market likes it.
That's right.
They're hopeful that this means we'll get tax cuts. Who are the Republicans that we should be watching most carefully? Who might be in the way besides Rand Paul, of any potential tax cuts?
Well, I think you've got to look at John McCain. He's already made some rumblings about not potentially being behind some of the tax reform. I think you've got to look at Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, just because they've been so problematic as well. My concern, Trish, is you look at the congressional calendar, there's only 28 working days left on the congressional calendar through the end of December. So they have to get serious. And again, they've got to go and make sure that this budget, they reconcile it with the House bill. It's got to go through the House and the Senate again. And then you can finally get to some of the tax reform issues. At that point, your calendar's even shorter. So I'm becoming a little less optimistic that we're actually going to get tax reform by the end of this year. It might go into 2018, which is, again, why you're seeing a lot of angst about what Senate leadership looks like in the 2018 primaries. Either do what you said you are going to do or get out of the way.
Well, Jack, are they setting themselves up sometimes for failure when they put these artificially imposed deadlines that they put on themselves? I mean, why not say, yeah, tax reform is going to happen. It'll happen at some point during this administration.
Well, it is an insanely aggressive schedule. I mean, under Reagan, it took 11 months from the time the bill was introduced to actual passage. And frankly, I think he was better at manipulating the legislature than Donald Trump is. And we didn't quite have the fighting amongst both within the Republican Party itself and between the two parties that we have now. So I think it is aggressive. We saw what happened with health care. I don't know that the mere fact of putting a deadline hurts things. In fact, I think it helps, right? If you want to get something done, give someone a deadline. Even if they blow it, maybe they'll get it done sooner than they would have otherwise.
That's the way the business world works, right?
Exactly. So there's nothing wrong with putting down a deadline, but it is incredibly aggressive.
Yeah, especially for lawmakers.
Yes, exactly.